We have all heard the song Copperhead Road and wished that was our personal backstory. But how much of it is true and how much is fiction? The deep history of moonshine in the backwoods of East Tennessee is far from fable. The story is told from the perspective of John Lee Pettimore III, observing the troubles his granddaddy went through in the bootlegging business. Eventually his father loses his life, and Pettimore gets drafted into the United States Army, where he serves 2 tours in Vietnam. When he returns to the States, he enters the marijuana business and ends up in the same life as the ones before him and repeats the warning, you better stay away from Copperhead Road. Verrill claimed in an interview that the idea for the song came from a 77-year-old woman named Elizabeth that was arrested for marijuana possession after her 2 sons brought back a bag of seeds from Vietnam. While this is an interesting story, we were not able to find that particular story in the archives of the North Carolina city that it was told to be from. Copperhead Road is a real road in Johnson City, Tennessee, but the official name has been changed to Copperhead Hollow Road because the road signs keep getting stolen by lovers of the song. So this is where this story takes an interesting turn. While we all wish it was true, it is just a song, but the history of shine in eastern Kentucky is a fascinating one and one that we want to tell. These mountain people were tough. Anything an Appalachia needed, they either made it, raised it, or traded for it. The use of actual money was not needed, as you likely knew someone that needed something that you had, and you needed something that they had. Coal mines, moonshine, or moving on down the line. That was the phrase that many people had in this part of the world. Coal mines and its health hazards are a well-known problem back then. Some of these mountain folks had decided to live that line of work, and then some that, even though they knew it was illegal, chose moonshine as a way of living. These roads are so difficult to navigate, hauling out corn to take to market was near impossible. This is where the liquid corn started flowing and the saying, "drink your corn," came from. Simply stated, moonshine is an untaxed liquor, historically produced often by the light of the moon, or at least out of the sight of law enforcement. Between 1817, when the excise tax was lifted, and 1862, when it was reinstated, backwoods distillers flourished just as much as larger companies, with one exception: the revenue men. The federal government knew this. In order to collect the taxes due, they sent out their revenue men. These mountain people, if you knew them and they liked you, they'd give you the shirt off their back. But if you crossed them, it'd be hell to pay. These revenue men would come into these hollers and never come back out. Rats were abundant, and the revenue men used them as pawns to settle scores. This is where we end up with the true story of Mollie Miller. Mollie Miller has gone in history as the woman moonshiner of Polk County, where she was the head of a gang that was involved in more bloody fights with revenue officers than any other moonshiners in the South. Mollie learned this way of life from her father, Sam Miller, particularly one event when Deputy Marshal McPherson led a raid under a guide who had a grudge against Miller, and this happened in an almost inaccessible gorge where the officers ran into the moonshiners, which resulted in 3 of the revenue men being killed. As the story goes, one of the people that murdered the revenuer was a young girl. Another raid was made in which Miller himself was killed and his associates were captured. About this time, the revenuers received a box containing the remains of the man who had informed upon the gang. There was nothing to indict from who it came or indicate who it belonged, but the box must have been carried by wagon and left at the marshal's house. The woman was not found, and it was soon known that she had fled. In a few months, Polk County, which had always furnished considerable illicit whiskey, became the headquarters of the moonshiners throughout East Tennessee. And raid followed raid until there was scarcely a cave in the Hiawassee River that had not been the scene of some bloody fight between the moonshiners and the revenue men. It became known that this woman was a leader, but she was never arrested but one time. And then the proof that was such, she escaped with a light sentence. After the Knoxville Southern Railroad was built, the country became too easy of access, and with the exception of an occasional petty offender, the gang was broken up. The woman moonshiner retired to a small farm where she remained undisturbed, except at 2 to 3 times when she was taken to Chattanooga as a witness, when she'd collect her fees and start her walk over the mountains, a distance of 60 miles back to her home. It is supposed that the killing of the 3 revenue officers and 4 or 5 informants can be charged to her directly, while the gang of which she was a member could be held accountable for several other murders. But it was never possible to prove these charges, and she died in 1873 without ever having been tried for them.